I've not done the 1-2 punch where I'm streaming on Facebook, I'm streaming on YouTube, I'm streaming on Twitter, and I'm streaming on Instagram all at once. But I realize as I'm doing this, there's a new AI piece of software that takes your eyes, and no matter what, it makes it look like you're looking at the camera. I could really use that because otherwise I have to look at Instagram and then look at Facebook and then look at Instagram and then look at Facebook. So you gotta have your head on a swivel. I've got a really important topic today, and it's one that I haven't talked about, certainly not this year. But I've obviously been doing a ton of reflection, looking at last year, looking at our most successful customers last year, trying to find recurring patterns of why those customers are the most successful, looking at our internal product, trying to figure out how we're going to make our product significantly better in 2023. And I've sort of been going on to these various different streams and ranting about this, that, or the other is a way of kind of fleshing out and baking out my own thoughts on all of these data points and everything that we're learning as a business. And so I want to get into some of those today. A little controversial, per usual. Most of what I do, I think, was probably fairly controversial, at least a little bit. But I think those are the best lessons learned, and at least we're talking about real stuff, right? Quickly, for anybody that wants to see what we do, by the way, at the top of the hour, 45 minutes from now, we're going to be having a free Zoom that's going to show all the bells, all the whistles, everything that we do at Art Storefronts. Are going to be talking about pricing, talking about all the plans, talking about all the things. So if you've ever wanted to see one of those and you haven't filled out a form or you haven't gone and scheduled a demo and done all of that, you don't have to today, because at the top of the hour, you can just join one for free. So if you're on Instagram, you want to see it, all you have to do is type the word Zoom. I will send you an invite. If you're on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, just leave me a comment that you want it, and I will send you the Zoom link. Easy enough, because my fancy bot cannot do that for me on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. Good. Yeah, and Juan, let me know for sure that that's working. So, and also throughout this thing, if you want to leave comments, I'll answer questions as well. I'm happy to do that on a Tuesday here. Why not? So one of the, and I realize this is not up to my mouth when it should be. You guys probably can't even hear me on Facebook. That was dumb. All right, let's fix that. Haven't done this in a while. Growing pains. All right, now I've got the mic up. Okay, so what I want to talk about, big picture, is a couple of things rolled into one. I'm going to throw in an analogy. Let me know if any of this sounds familiar or doesn't sound familiar to you. But I realize as we get into the, coming up on a decade of being in business as a business storefront, you start to get all sorts of learnings that you didn't necessarily have at the beginning, right? And really, in a word, why we exist as a business at Art Storefronts, the whole point, if you like. Thanks, Juan. The whole point is we are essentially filling the void that was left by art school or photography school or even the school of hard knocks that said, guess what? You, creative type there, that is trying to take your God-given creative talents and monetize them to turn it into a business such that you can quit your day job and support your family, that class never existed. You had to learn it on your own. You had to learn it through hard knocks. There weren't classes in school you could take. There was no one that was successful already that was like, hey, I know exactly how to do all this. Just follow what I'm saying and it will go great for you. Why didn't that class exist? And I realize that's essentially why we have a business at Art Storefronts. We teach artists and photographers based on previous successful artists and photographers. Here are the things that you need to be doing that will put you on a path towards having a successful business, okay? And yes, that's what we teach our customers, but anyone that's consuming our content, that's why you follow us in the first place, because there's nowhere else that teaches you the damn thing. There are no books that say, hey, here's how to be a successful artist, here's how to be a successful photographer, just follow these steps, right? And there should be. I don't know why that content doesn't exist. It's sort of infuriating. And one of the things that I've come to realize, sort of going through this journey, is there are some definitive things that distinguish what makes a successful artist and photographer. There is a huge fork in the road that determines about whether or not you have a hobby or whether you have a business that's growing year after year. Not enough people are talking about it. And not enough information exists online about how you actually go about doing it. But you know where it does exist? Where it does exist rather clearly is history. And I don't think that gets brought up enough. And I swear somebody needs to write the book where you talk about all of these successful artists from years past. And in the artist thing, like making it and having a successful business as someone who paints or someone who photographs or someone who creates, I can somewhat lump in anyone that is a writer, anyone that is a musician, and anyone that is an actual artist. Like making it in any of those disciplines is essentially the same path. Some fraught with a little bit more danger than others, right? It takes way longer to write a song than it does a painting in most cases, and it takes way longer to write a book than both of them combined. But you know, the what unites them, the similarities are so much more significant, right? And I want to talk about three artists. Okay, I want to talk about three artists. Then I want to get into a bit of assembly, and then I want to explain, or a bit of analogy rather, and then I want to explain why I think that analogy pretty much sums up why we exist, art storefronts, both as a business and both as a content marketing operation. So talking to the people that are not yet customers, might not ever be customers, but that are on here and watching these things, trying to grow their businesses, is let's talk about history for a second. First, I want to talk about successful artists, and all of which to make a point, right? All of which to make a point. In the point that I'm going to make is that failure is not only part of the process, but failure is a massively healthy step towards inevitable success. And that sounds so cliche, doesn't it? It's not the amount of times you get knocked down, it's whether or not you get back up. And yet if we look at the actual numbers and like break down some of the successes that have made it as artists, the same damn story just keeps coming back to the surface and back to the surface and back to the surface. And if we don't stop and talk about it and say like, what can we learn about it? Then it just is lost to history, right? And the first one I always cite is Pablo Picasso. And the reason that I always cite Pablo Picasso is because upon his death, he had 45,000 unsold works that passed over to his heirs. He had a legitimate child and an illegitimate child. And the reason we know they had 45,000 works because he didn't have a will and they were arguing about it. And I always use that number to tell the story about like what Picasso knew that everyone else didn't, which is being successful as an artist or a photographer doesn't mean every single solitary thing that you create is a massive hit and it sells out and you just sell so well and you're incredible. And then if for some reason you create something and you go and try and sell it and it isn't a big hit, that means you should quit or you're a crappy artist, you're a crappy photographer, right? And I think the 45,000 unsold works is a great way to talk about it and is a great way to sell the whole thing. What it got me thinking is like, well, how many works did that guy actually create, right? And I did a quick Google search on that today, and I found out, and I want to talk about it. He, during the course of his life, he died when he was 78, so a 78-year-old career, or 78-year career. He created 147,800 pieces. 147,800 pieces, 13,500 paintings. He created 100,000 prints and engravings, which I need to fact check that. Like, what does prints and engravings even mean? Was that like he ran prints of his other work and that was 90,000 pieces? I don't know. 300 sculptures and ceramics, 34,000 illustrations, right? If that's a 78-year career, let's say he started when he was 16. So he created essentially 2,383 works per year. And over his life, right? And that essentially averages 6.5 per day. That's insane, right? Why isn't anyone talking about that? Did you know he created that much work? No. No one ever talks about that. No one ever talks about anything other than someone's greatest hits, right? They talk about the hits, and they don't ever talk about all the work that was put in on creating all those things and making it and becoming really, really successful. Okay, let's take it out of art. Let's go into music. Ever hear of a group called the Bee Gees? And I love this one, right? Because I was on here doing one of these rants and someone on Instagram said, go Google the Bee Gees and Google their story. And like, I knew who the Bee Gees were. It's a little bit before my generation. And what am I, 44 right now? I didn't grow up listening to the Bee Gees, but obviously everyone knew who they were because they were huge, right? In total, they wrote 1,030 songs, the Bee Gees did. 1,030 songs. And this is what I found quickly Googling. 15 out of the 1,030 were #1 hits in the United States. That means 1.45% of what those guys created was a hit, right? 1.45% of those they created was a hit. Mind-boggling, right? the production that those guys went through, their work rate never gets talked about. But the fact that they wrote that many songs to arrive at this small number of hits, and by the way, they had 29 top 40 hits, and they had 15 top 10 hits. So very, very small level of success in there relative to all the songs that they wrote. But they kept writing. They kept writing a prolific amount. What the Bee Gees did is essentially exactly the same path of success that Pablo Picasso did. They kept creating. They realized that their work product needed to go out in the world. They realized sometimes it's not going to be a home run. Sometimes it's going to be a dud. Guess what? That's okay. Failure is part of the process. Go and start again and emerge at the end and then see whether or not you get it that time. No one ever teaches that. Let's talk about authors, right? One of my favorite authors. He's become a big deal recently because his book just got made into a movie for the third time. And it's this guy named Frank Herbert. And Frank Herbert wrote Dune, right? And he wrote Dune. And I read his biography because I was kind of fascinated by him, which was written by his son. His son's an author. And the entire biography is essentially failure after failure after failure after selling a work and barely making any money on it, failure, having a newspaper job. I mean, he wrote 75 plus books. In addition to all the articles and all the short stories that he wrote, Frank Herbert did. And yet almost no one knows his name. And if they do, they only know about him for Dune. And they don't know about him for all the rest of those failures and all the rest of those attempts that he wrote. Like, has anyone even ever heard of any of his other books? Right? Like, I just read his biography and I can't even name another one. I read his biography like a year ago. And I know it's a bunch of short stories and everything else. So the point is, historically speaking, we have a bunch of examples of artists in multiple different disciplines that were incredibly successful and had these incredible careers, and no one ever talks about how they did it. No one ever teaches the fact that failure is totally okay and part of the process. Not only is it part of the process, it's only through failure, through works that you create that don't sell as well as you would like them to, that we actually get anywhere. And I realize that, and there's a lot to unpack in that, right? There's a lot to unpack in that, and that's what I want to talk about specifically. Quickly, for those that are just joining us, if you want to see what we do at Art Storefronts in 30 minutes, we're having a free Zoom. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or Instagram, all you have to do is leave me a comment with the word Zoom, and I will send you on Instagram to your direct message box a link to go to this Zoom. You can go in 30 minutes, watch, stay for as long as you want, see all the plans, all the bells, all the whistles, ask questions about pricing and everything else. So if you want to go do that, just leave me a comment, Zoom, and I will send that to you. Now, I want to get back to my analogy. We're on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. Just leave me a comment, and I'll paste it in the comments. Okay. So if we realize that some of the most successful artists in history, both authors and painters and musicians, all understood that failure was a normal part of the process, okay? Then you start to think, okay, well, how do we encourage folks to have the freedom, the permission to understand that it's part of the process, to understand that it's okay, to give you permission to do it on a regular basis, to let you know that it doesn't mean you're a crappy photographer, you're a crappy artist. And, you know, I talk to so many different artists and photographers on a regular basis that I realize the mental component here is probably the one that is missing more than anything else. Now, the analogy I'm going to give is that of an assembly line. And the reason is that my wife works for an electric car manufacturer. I'm not going to say which one, but she's in there. We both work from home, and I hear her conversations all the time, and I'm kind of fascinated by it. And so the assembly line just makes a ton of sense to me. Now, a lot of people's normal, natural reaction to an assembly line is like, oh, mass-produced. This is art. You can't do that. I mean, assembly line is a very efficient process in which you can figure out whether or not what you just created is a hit or is a dud or is something in between, okay? And there is absolutely a way to systematize that part of the process. And if you do so as an artist or a photographer, if you realize such a thing has existed for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, that more successful artists and photographers figured this out and through sheer gumption and persistence and work ethic got there, what can we extrapolate from what they've learned and say, here is an assembly line type of a process that will allow me to control my creative machine to create what I want to create, to take that product to market, to see whether or not it will sell, to see whether or not I'm onto something, or know that I'm not, and then will put me right back at the beginning of the line so I could do the process again. And if I had to highlight one thing, and all the artists and photographers, my customers included, it's no one's told you that such a thing exists. No one's giving you the permission to fail. Not that you need the permission to fail, but no one's giving you the permission, the understanding to know failure is all part of the game and it's totally normal. No one's ever letting you know that sometimes you create things and they're only mildly successful, and you're not going to be able to build a career on mildly successful. That you have desires and ambitions for your business to be more than mildly successful, and how do you plan for that particular thing? And so I love this like assembly line idea, right? This assembly line concept in which you say, I'm going to start at the beginning of this line. I am going to create some art. I am going to make sure I get it in front of enough eyeballs. I am going to, after I get it in front of enough eyeballs, be able to determine whether or not it sells or it doesn't sell, and whether or not I know I'm onto something or I'm not, right? And if you go back and you contemplate this assembly line and you contemplate what it looked like with Picasso, Picasso knew that everything that he created needed to sell. It needed to go out into the world. And so his line was, early on, my works did not command high prices, paraphrasing, but all my work sold. Your work must go out into the world, right? The Bee Gees knew that they would write a song, it would go on an album. If it didn't get ranked in the charts, they knew it wasn't a huge hit, and they moved on to the next one, right? And they just kept writing and writing and writing. Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune, he knew that if he created a story and it didn't sell, move on, right? But if it did sell, okay, you've got a hit, keep going, try a different thing. So there's a process here that we need to go through and that we need to learn, and we need to articulate, like, what are the steps? Like, how long should you work on creating the thing? How long should you work on marketing the thing? What's the most effective way to market the thing? How do I get it in front of enough eyeballs such that I know I'm onto something or I'm not? And how quickly can we repeat that process, right? And I realize that for both you guys that are watching this, and then also for all of our customers, our job at Art Storefronts is to take those steps in that assembly line towards success and try to take as many things off of your plate as possible and do them for you. Try to best articulate what the steps are and how much time you spend on each. Try to get you better and quicker, because ultimately the speed of that line, the speed of how quickly you can go through that assembly line and figure out whether or not you've got something is the whole ball game, because there's no limit to the number of times you can ride it, right? And you know, I think back to like the stories of Henry Ford, and there's this crazy stat that when Ford invented the Model T, okay, and he obviously revolutionized manufacturing with the thirst assembly lines and had these Model Ts going out faster than anything else, so fast that he essentially eliminated horses and eliminated horse and buggies from our streets in like a period of like 10 years or something like that. Like, they showed pictures of like New York where it was horse and buggy days, and there's like 9 million horses in one car. The first car was out. And then 10 years later, there's one horse left and it's all cars. Like, it happened that quickly. It's crazy, right? And one of the interesting things that Ford did is the assembly line was so quick that the only color early on you could order the Model T in was black, because black was the only colored paint that dried fast enough to not slow down the assembly line. And I tell that story to say, like, the whole ball game comes down to speed. And I look at my entire customer base, and I'm like, the faster I can get them creating, taking the product to market, seeing whether or not it'll sell. Is it selling successfully enough to keep it part of my lineup, to ignore it and move on to something else, and then rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. The more I can get them on that assembly line and get them moving quickly down that, the quicker they're going to be successful. The quicker they're going to be able to quit their day job. The quicker their photography is going to start paying more and more and more of their bills. And so that's really the whole ballgame. And I realized we can teach how to move faster on that line. We can teach what the steps look like. We can show you how your peers are going through that line and what they're learning along the way and how quickly they're figuring out whether or not the art that they have is a hit or is not a hit, what success potentially looks like, what are the metrics along the way. And that's really going to be the whole ballgame. And I also realized, you know, being at this as long as we've been at this, I realized that on that assembly line, there's technology. That's the website software that helps you build a website and helps you show your art and helps you market it. There's the education, which teaches you how to market, and teaches you how to run sales, and teach you how to do emailing, teach you how to capture emails, and teaches you what to do at an in-person show or fair and all of those things, right? Then there's the in-person teaching to go along with the do-it-yourself teaching. And then there's the encouragement that says, this is normal. You're allowed to fail. It's all good. It's all part of it. Keep moving. And then there's the accountability. Why did you come off the assembly line? You said you want to be a successful artist. This is the way. We know this is the way. Keep going. And, you know, it's part technology. It's part education. And then it's part encouragement and accountability and saying, don't worry. I know this is a lonely road. I know it's hard. This is the part of the line where everyone normally quits. Just stay on the line. Get to the end of it. Do it again. And if we can build that process and help automate that process and make it faster and teach people how to go down it, we are going to have significantly more successful customers. And that is one heck of a fascinating thing to contemplate. And it is absolutely a stated goal of where we're going in this year to come. And so a lot of the content that we'll be releasing will anchor back and will center on these themes, right? That will let folks know that they can fail, that it's a natural part of getting to where you need to go, that you might go all the way down the assembly line and you realize that you created a work that you can sell $10,000 worth a year. Okay, that's fantastic. But your ambition for your business is not $10,000 a year, it's $100,000 a year, $200,000 a year. So that's great. We've created this thing that we can sell $10,000 worth a year, but guess what? You've got to get back on the assembly line and create some other stuff and find out whether or not you can create something that will sell 100,000 or 150,000. And so there's so many different permutations of this, and it's where we get into these things like, how do you price your art? What type of price point should you have in your lineup? How important is it to acquire new customers? How do you do that? And all of the various different themes and the things that we do as a business and that we try to teach our customers, all is just steps along this line of you attempting to take your work to market and see what the deal is. And, you know, I look at our customer base, and even the most successful ones, like the top, like 1%, do you know how few of them actually have one particular niche and one particular style that they stick to all the time? It is a tiny, tiny number. Almost all the rest are experimenting still on a regular basis, and they have been for a regular portion of their career. And Chris on here is like, oh my God, this sounds exhausting. Doing it incorrectly, Chris, is the exhausting part. Doing it incorrectly is the exhausting part. That's where you waste all this time, all this energy, all this effort, and the outcome you are guaranteed is failure. The outcome you are guaranteed is a hobby. How quickly you go through this process, okay, is utterly, totally, and completely up to you. Not going through the process is guaranteed hobbydom. And so my argument is like, the process is what creates successful artists and photographers. And somehow some of the most successful amongst us just innately know this or have this in their DNA, and everyone else doesn't. And everyone else, even the ones that get on the right path, they end up quitting or deciding this isn't for me and I can't do it because they have a mental issue. So it doesn't mean that you have to get on this treadmill, okay, and not get off until you're a Picasso or a Bee Gees or a Frank Herbert, right? What I'm saying is that this is the process. This is the path towards getting there. Whether your goal is just to sell a couple thousand a year, or it's to sell 100,000 a year, or 1 million a year, 10 million. Like, everyone is going through the same process. It just hasn't been systematized enough yet and taught enough yet, and it needs to be, and that's what we're going to be teaching. So don't let it overwhelm you. It just comes down whether or not you want to have a business or you want to have a hobby, right? And like, the size of the business is utterly, totally, and completely up to you, right? And we grapple with that as a business at Art Storefronts all the time, because everyone's expectations for where they want their art business to go are completely different. Some people are like, look, I'm retired and I just want to make $10,000 to $15,000 a year to supplement my retirement income, and that's what I want to do. Others are like, I'm working a 9 to 5 here, pal, and it sucks. I want to quit this tomorrow. Can you help me out, right? And so everything in between. So it's independent, or it's dependent upon where your goal is. What we need to ensure is that the folks that say, yes, we're signing up with Art Storefronts, we want to have the business, we want to have a business that's growing, that we can show what that process looks like. That we can show what that process looks like and make you go down that process as fast as possible. So doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean you don't have to do the hard work. But if you're signing up with us, or normally if you're like consuming this content, you've already expressed a desire that you want to get better at this, right? That you want to kick butt. So I'm excited. I think it's going to be really fun to cover, and I can't wait to talk about it more. In the meantime, anybody that wants to see everything that we do at Art Storefronts, it's the last day of the month. I know they're having a huge deal today. So if you're watching on Instagram, all you have to do is leave a comment with the word Zoom, and I will send you a link to your DMs where you can join the Zoom. It's in the top of the hour, like 20 minutes or so, just at the top of the hour whenever you're seeing this. And you can get on there, you can join, ask questions about pricing, plans, see the deal, all the bells, all the whistles. For everybody else, for their customers, you can expect to hear more and more and more on this topic. I really, really enjoy the thought of it, enjoy the analogy. I think teaching on it is going to be a critical component of continued success of our customers this year, and for anyone that's watching our content and going to be consuming the content on a regular basis. And yes, thank you for saying that, Christopher. Christopher is asking like where the hell the podcasts have gone. The podcasts have sort of morphed into these like live broadcasts that I've been doing all the time, but I personally love podcasts. I listen to them all the time. I really enjoy them, and I know I have to get the thing going on. So first of the month is tomorrow, Chris, and I got to get that baby fired back up again, and get the podcast regularly coming. So yes, absolutely, they're going to come back. Like a longer-winded version of this will no doubt end up on the podcast, because it's just not something that anyone ever talks about. Like failure is a normal part of the process. I mean, so many folks create what they want to create. They're like, this is what sustains me. This is what fulfills me. I'm a landscape photographer. In my backyard are the Smoky Mountains. What I have photos of are the Smoky Mountains. And then you go and try and sell that, right? And you either quit before you get it in front of enough eyeballs to know whether or not you actually have something, or you go and try and sell it, and the collective reaction is like, meh, it's okay, but I don't really want it. And that's where everyone quits. Or that's where everyone thinks like, I don't need to keep doing this anymore. I'm not good enough. Or maybe this is just a hobby. And not enough people like know that, like, guess what? Welcome to the club. Totally normal. What happens to absolutely all of us in this process? Keep going. Go get back in the front of the line again and go through the process again, and then do it again and do it again and do it again. And guess what? Every single solitary person that's become successful has already done it a bunch of times. No one hits a home run on the first at bat, right? The Bee Gees wrote 1,000 songs, 1.45% of which were hits, right? Like Picasso, 147,000 pieces he created, and Frank Herbert was doing 75 plus books. And so, regardless of how hard you work the process, regardless of where you are in your career, like just knowing that and having the reinforcement and getting the motivation and getting the teaching that you need to go through that process quicker, total game changer. Total game changer. And we've been at this as a business at Art Storefronts long enough now that we see, I don't know how they got it, osmosis or nature or nurture or whatever, but some of our most successful customers have just been gifted with this skill set, and they just have it naturally, intuitively, and you see them doing it. Over the course of the 5 years, I've seen them do 25 different styles, and some have done better than others. And the ones that have done better than the others, they've stuck with, but they're still looking for new styles, new niches, new ideas. And it's what Picasso did. It's what the Bee Gees did. It's what Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune, did. It's what probably every successful artist in history has done. So we need to talk more and more about that. So big Zoom. Only if you're not a customer and you want to see what we do. If you're a customer, then you already know. Susan, good to see you. You're joining at the end of this. So you can leave a comment on this thing, Zoom. I will send you a link. You can join the session, and that Zoom starts in 15 minutes at the top of the hour. For everybody else, you'll see more on the assembly line in coming episodes. and the podcast, which is soon to be resurrected again. So thank you all for watching. Appreciate you all. Have a great rest of your days, great weeks, and you have permission to fail. You have permission.